Your Highnesses, Excellencies, जैसा आप सब जानते हैं, भारत के पास नवंबर तक G20 प्रेसिडेंसी की भी जिम्मेदारी है। अभी 2.5 महीने बाकी हैं। इन 2 दिनों में आप सभी ने अनेक बातें यहां रखी हैं, सुझाव दिए हैं, बहुत सारे प्रस्ताव रखे हैं। हमारी ये जिम्मेदारी है कि जो सुझाव आए हैं उनको भी एक बार फिर देखा जाए कि उनकी प्रगति में गति कैसे लाई जा सकती है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि हम नवंबर के अंत में G20 का एक वर्चुअल सेशन और रखें। उस सेशन में हम इस समिट के दौरान तय विषयों की समीक्षा कर सकते हैं। इन सब की डिटेल्स हमारी टीम आप सभी के साथ शेयर करेगी। मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आप सब इससे जुड़ेंगे। योर हाइनेसेस, एक्सेलेंसीज, इसी के साथ मैं G20 समिट के समापन की घोषणा करता हूं। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर का रोड मैप सुखद हो। स्वस्ति अस्तु विश्वस्य, यानी संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
And with that, the baton has been passed over to Brazil. Prime Minister Modi has handed over the G20 presidency to Brazil. We saw Brazilian President Lula Da Silva also addressing the members there. Many pertinent points in his address. He highlighted that the fight against hunger and poverty, climate change, reform on global governance institutions are all part of the Brazilian presidency model. President Lula Da Silva also thanked India for a successful G20 summit, also saying that he was in fact touched and that Mahatma Gandhi was his role model when he was part of the labor movement. And he thanked India's endeavor of getting everyone on the same page. Again, he stressed on the need for social inclusion, fight against hunger and poverty, and climate change, reform of global governance, also emphasizing on the fact that when it comes to resources, technology transfer, there needs to be greater participation of emerging economies, not just in that aspect, but also in international global governance institutions as well. He also spoke about the reform of the global governance institutions, saying that we need to redouble efforts in these areas. Otherwise, the globe faces the biggest multilateral crisis. Resources and technology transfer, some of the other things that he stressed on. He thanked India for a successful G20 summit and welcomed all the members to the Rio de Janeiro summit in 2024. Prime Minister Modi also thanked all the members of the G20 as well as the invitees, also saying, important point here, saying that many solutions and suggestions were put forth by the members and the invitees, and said that it is now India's responsibility to review some of these suggestions and then formulate an action plan, and also in fact proposed a virtual session of the G20 towards the end of November, the details of which of course will be finalized much later. Now for more on this, we have with us our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us. We just heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi's closing remarks, as well as he's now handed over the presidency to Brazil. What can you tell us? What would you say were the key highlights?
Well, 2 days of hectic diplomacy might be over, but it looks like the momentum continues. The momentum India generated when it comes to hosting the summit. We have a joint statement which has been chalked out with references to Ukraine. We also have a connectivity project that links India with Europe via the West Asian countries. And now, of course, the Indian Prime Minister just announced a virtual summit as well of the G20 grouping, which will happen as India hands over the presidency. In fact, the ceremonial handing over has taken place. We saw those visuals. But remember, India will officially hand over presidency to Brazil on 30th of November. And from 1st of December, we will see Brazil taking over the charge of this mega grouping. But essentially, India gained a lot. A major focus was from the Indian side to give an Indian imprint on global governance architecture. We know several declarations on tourism and others have been adopted as part of the outcomes of the G20 Summit. Focus also was to give voice to the global south in terms of bringing the global south on the table by inviting countries like Egypt, Nigeria, and of course Mauritius as well. Comoros was represented as the chair of the African Union.
Right.
And Delhi, of course, has now given its firm imprint on G20 by making sure that African Union is invited every year when it comes to hosting of this summit.
Absolutely, Siddhant, and you rightly mentioned Prime Minister Modi did say that there were many solutions and suggestions over the course of the summit that were put forth by the invitees and the member states as well, saying that it's now India's responsibility to then review these suggestions and formulate a plan of action, for which he has proposed that virtual summit towards the end of November. What sort of plan of action can we see going forward?
Well, remember, while major plan of action has been implemented, including the ministerial meetings, which we saw across the length of breadth of country, from Kashmir to Kerala, from Kutch to Arunachal Pradesh, and essentially there have been a lot of suggestions. And remember, this is a very dynamic grouping in terms of its working. It does not have a secretariat, because usually groupings have a permanent place, a permanent secretariat. I'll give you an example. The UN is based out of New York. BIMSTEC in the region is based out of Dhaka. SAARC, which looks very defunct now, is based out of Kathmandu. Shanghai Cooperation is based out of China. So essentially, this is not present in the G20, which is not its disadvantage, its advantage, because essentially the group's chair leads all the proceedings when it comes to deciding what to do. And that is why India was keen that countries put forward their problems and any solutions as well, particularly countries of the global south, especially problems related to the food, fuel and commodity prices, which have substantially increased in the aftermath of the Ukraine conflict.
Right, Siddhant, let's also talk about the key highlights of the third session, One Future as well. What can you tell us?
Well, this session which took place was essentially to give a sum up of what has happened in last 24 hours. We have seen two earlier sessions. The focus was on a range of issues, from climate change to minutes, and India has been keen that when it comes to, as we have been talking about, the problems of global south being discussed. But it was a very particular presidency, in terms of a very unique presidency, in terms of India's focus on not only showcasing India in front of the world, but also talking about world's problems. And one of the key outcomes in many ways for many of us, and this is something that is dominating the global headlines and the national headlines here, is the miracle of the joint statement. It finally came out. It has a number of paras on Ukraine, including the Indian Prime Minister's famous speech, this famous statement, in fact, that this is not an era of war, presented in that joint statement. So essentially an important session. We saw the opening statement by the Prime Minister, and of course the closing statement of the Prime Minister and the next president of the grouping, the President of Brazil. That is it. The other proceedings are off record, off camera. Some countries do release it, but now the focus is to get more details as to what transpired. And while the summit is over, the action hasn't. We will see a lot of press conferences, and a short while ago I got information that the Turkish president is going to hold a press conference, the French president is going to hold a press conference, and the Comorian president is also going to hold a press conference.
Right. Well, Siddhant, thank you so much for the latest on this. Do stay on with us. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.